Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be. I am Nicole BC, and you know everything. Hi, it's me again. You're welcome. Thank you for being here. I just ate a quesadilla. I reckon I probably should have checked my teeth before we started. Welcome to the mess. Welcome to the experiment ongoing. And welcome to the deep dive. So last week we talked about the future now again. And today I want to drill into each of those thought leaders, each of the concepts that we talked about in terms of emergent business: regenerative, adaptive, decentralized, asynchronous. These buzzwords we're hearing over and over again, but what they really mean, how they've been applied, and how you can start applying them now today to your work, to your networks, to your business, if that applies. The industrial business model was built for productivity, for predictability, for certainty: assembly lines, quarterly reports, 10-year business plans, investment strategies, command and control. But we don't live in predictability anymore. There is no certainty. The illusion has dissolved. The veil has been pulled back. We live in chaos. Supply chains snap overnight. AI rewrites the rules before you've even learned the last update. And climate shocks don't just disrupt industries, they destroy them. Yet still, leaders, and to be perfectly honest, most of us find ourselves clinging to the old playbook. Meetings, hierarchies, emails, control, certainty. This isn't just an outdated way of working. It's dangerous. I have been talking about survive or thrive all damn year. And quite frankly, I've been talking about it forever, but it's just reached a fever pitch in 2025, depending on when you're listening to this. So today I want to talk about emergent business because it's happening whether or not we like it, whether or not we know what it means, whether or not we believe in it. It is the new way, and I believe the only way forward. And why? Because it's emerging. It's happening. Your other option, go backwards. And I'm not going back there. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm assuming you're going to join me because you're here. Let's go. And look, we all know the headlines: disengaged employees, quiet quitting, burnout pandemic, 100%. The real breaking point isn't out there. It's right here. I'm pointing at me. I'm pointing at you. It is when we collapse, because we are the believers. We are the creatives. We are the creators. We are the founders and the CEOs and the ones that are willing to trailblaze and break the rules and experiment. So if we can't believe, hope, dream, if we can't even think clearly anymore, when running your own business, when being the king or queen of your own castle doesn't just feel like thriving anymore, it's just a matter of survival, we need to evolve. And that's where emergent business strategy comes in. And I'm going to go through a little bit of stats, though, just because they helped me feel not as alone and not like I'm doing it wrong. But over 70% of CEOs are now reporting burnout. 55% of the CEOs in the US have had a mental health challenge. I think we know what that means. Just in the last year. 94% of small business owners said they are experiencing extreme symptoms of burnout. And over 30% of those say they feel burnt out regularly just in the last year. Interestingly, 82% of executives, so not just the founders, but the founders and CEOs support their C-suite, their VP level, the leaders in your organization, they have reported more stress in the last year than ever before, because economic uncertainty, labor shortages, inflation, these aren't just abstracts. They are day-to-day challenges. These are the downstream effects of fatigue, burnout, this need for certainty, this replaying of the old playbook. It's led to bad hires, delayed pivots, avoidance, kicking the can down the road. Like, what we're all dealing with right now is everything we've ignored over the last 30 years, which has still been the collapse of capitalism, right? Like, this isn't a new, our predecessors, they've been having this conversation since the 60s. That's a long time to be talking about the same problems. Founders, CEOs, these people listed in these stats are telling us, I'm making decisions based on fear, and I have worse mental health as a result. I am losing sleep. I am dropping healthy habits, which is only going to increase this problem. And I don't mean to start this out with a whole bunch of fear mongering. It's the last thing you fucking need. Again, this is more to just normalize what you're experiencing and challenge you to recognize this isn't everything that's happened up until now needs a shift. And I'm taking personal responsibility for my own willingness to go, okay, this isn't working. Let's try something new. And just to be clear, this isn't just a US thing. Founders, CEOs, leaders, organizations across Europe, Asia, everywhere are saying the same thing. Financial pressure, loneliness, uncertainty infiltrate their day-to-day and affect their ability to lead and make decisions. The US situation is sharper because of the scale of expectation, the speed of change, and the cultural norm here that leaders never stop and never take time off. Because when you're the founder, the creator, the leader, you can't just throw your hands up, right? But what happens when you also can't think anymore? It's not personal, it's structural. And this is, again, where we see the decisions getting deferred, the vision being clouded, the risks feeling amplified, the culture fracturing, and the innovation stalling. And every now and again, we see the business fall apart. So again, I'm not here to diagnose. I'm not labeling. I'm not shaming. I am recognizing we're all in this together, whether we like it or not. So what we are here to do is see what's been done when people stand at this cliff. Because what emerges is this dare to change the terrain, to change the launch pad, to change the landing zone. This is where emergent business theory begins, at the edge of collapse. Again, what if this isn't a problem? Where's the opportunity in that? When traditional control systems are designed for predictability, we are finding ourselves living very much in a state of volatility. And emergence is how living systems adapt. This is how we thrive. So Mary Parker Follett, who not a lot of people acknowledged until more recently, in the 1900s, she started to see these factory line management theory tendencies. This is where, I hope you might be hearing my dog bark. She's pretending like she's going to protect us. She's probably just going to lick us to death. Anywho, it's probably because the trash is getting picked up. Good job. Good job, dog. So this isn't just something that popped up in the 90s. In the early 1900s, a thought leader, Mary Parker Follett, who not a lot of people have not acknowledged, probably because of gender and time, that's a different podcast episode, she started to notice this use of power over, of domination. And you want to talk about disengaged employees? Look at a factory line from the early 1900s. Like, it was pretty dismal. She started to ask the question, what if power didn't have to mean domination? What if instead of power over, we could power with? Again, she was largely ignored. And it wasn't until, I'd say, the 80s, with this idea that management didn't necessarily have to mean control. And in fact, if you had self-managed autonomous people, you were probably going to get a lot better work, for lack of a better term, that she was rediscovered. She was responding to early 20th century Taylorism, industrial Taylorism, where it just became a matter of efficiency and output. And she challenged this idea by saying, what if we ask what is power as opposed to measuring simply output? This is where relational models started to gain traction. And this is also where we saw women becoming leaders in Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. It was still few and far between, but Sage Journals talks a lot about Mary Parker Follett joining the ranks of management theorists when women joined the ranks of CEOs. Gregory Bateson wrote about Steps to an Ecology of Mind, born of World War II and Cold War cybernetics. What this thought leader recognized was the ecological concern. Bateson saw fragmented thinking as the root of war, addiction, and social dysfunction. The question he asked was, what if knowledge is relational, not linear? What if society's, air quote, biggest problems are contextual and relationships drive behavior? So you can see how this all starts to seed management theory. Peter Senge in 1990 wrote The Fifth Discipline and asked, why do great organizations fail to learn? We've seen corporates collapse repeatedly under their own weight. This is where systems thinking became the buzzword. How can we enable this entity to learn and adapt? And then we see Margaret Wheatley, who we talked about in the last episode. So she's recognizing the inherent chaos in our world and our inability to recognize that in our organizations. And as quantum theory, as this living systems metaphor start to play out, Margaret Wheatley asks, why do we fear chaos instead of learning from it? She invited leaders to see organizations like weather systems, alive, unpredictable, and creative. These weren't armchair ideas. These were all responses to epic failures. So, what is emergent business? It treats an organization like a living system, not a machine. It replaces rigid prediction with sensing, learning, and iteration. Emergence isn't chaos. It is coherence without control. So one of the things we'll continually come back to in emergent business is this not just ability, but willingness to make a decision. The challenge is how can you create consistency? How can you enable the hive mind in your organization? So you can trust that decisions are being made in the best interest of the organization as a whole, not necessarily the individual or their interpretation of particular situations. So this comes from repeat and practiced input from all of those affected, including those with the expertise, but also including those at the end of the decision-making process, those that might be impacted the most, say your customer, client, buyer, the kind of end of that decision-making chain. So we're distributing authority, but without like that blasé consensus that can come with it in sort of hierarchical organizations, where you are truly empowered to make a decision. And is it your individualized decision or is it our collective decision? In the 2000s, Ricardo Semler asked, why do we treat adults like children at work? So he ran a massive corporation in Brazil, and a lot of cultures take hierarchy and classism incredibly seriously in an organizational context. So he decided to dismantle that within his company and proved that radical trust can actually work. Rod Collins, who we mentioned in the last episode, asked, how can we lead without knowing all the answers? And this is one of my favorite provocations of emergent business, because this is what we're all being asked to do right now. How can we build something when we don't know what it looks like? How can we create something knowing there is no end result? This is the revolution. This is the impossible task we're all having to play out right now. When the internet came online, monopolies dissolved. Sure, new ones were created, but we saw that network beat hierarchy, especially in fast-moving environments. And now we're all living that. Frederick Laloux, who wrote in Reinventing, or asked, I should say, in Reinventing Organizations, what if organizations could evolve like consciousness? It's starting to get interesting now. This is why I'm obsessed, my friend. So this thought leader witnessed and researched how fear and ego corrupted even mission-driven organizations. And we have also seen this time and time again. You give the best intended leader a little power, some stakeholder demands, perhaps the funding of PE or VC companies, and all of a sudden they're Scrooge McDuck, right? So this is where that concept of teal organizations became a model for self-management, evolutionary purpose and wholeness. Nora Bateson, who wrote Small Arcs of Larger Circles, asked, what happens when we ignore the context of our decisions? This is harder to do than it sounds, but there's sort of a much older philosophical debate that goes around this with even the best intentions fail. So in terms of social policy and government, the challenge we experience with policy designed with purpose to support the people is that it's reduced to numbers. And so we tend to be measuring input along with output rather than results, because policy and government need data in order to measure success, and usually in a shorter time frame than is perhaps going to be useful for policy change and societal and cultural change. So they created this concept of warm data, again mentioned in the last episode, as a method to restore complexity and care to decision making. So again, what if this data aren't these like cold hard facts and numbers caught in a moment of time, but like these malleable spots, red, orange, green, as opposed to black and white. Chuck Blakeman wrote in Why Employees Are Always a Bad Idea, and asked the question, why are we still managing people like it's 1911? We've talked a lot about this in this podcast, but this idea of participatory economics where ownership equals commitment. And rather than measuring people's input, time, output, money, surely there is a more adaptive model to reward those who want to invest. And that can look a variety of different ways, not just time. Yes, there are people out there doing this. Yes, they fail. Yes, some succeed. How do you pick and choose? How do you know which model to employ? How do you know if it's working for you? Let's go through a few examples. And I think you know what I'm going to say to answer that question. Buurtzorg, the Dutch home care organization and revolution, believed in self-managed nurse teams because they hypothesized it would cut hours per patient, which seems like a bad input, right? But what if we could improve the results? Better care, higher satisfaction, and potentially lower costs overall once the system effects are counted, not necessarily hours in, patients out, but professional care, patient experience, provider experience, costs across the system, etc. And what happened was everybody was happier. Everybody got better care. Yeah, it took a lot less time and therefore saved a lot of money. Also, then took this powerful system and was able to offer it to more patients. And it proved that trust within small teams was multiplied across the organization. So they were able to extend the success of this experiment rather than stay linear in their organizational output. Really, really interesting example. And what I thought was fascinating is that this case study has been used over and over again when talking about regenerative, adaptive, emergent business strategy. And I think it took a willingness from all participants, patients, providers, organization, Dutch government, to be willing to say, let's try it. Let's see what happens. Morning Star, a tomato processing plant. Not very creative, right? They asked, what might happen if we remove the bosses? Not just a dream come true, my friend. Self-management at industrial scale. Harvard Business Review actually did a case study on this particular organization because they truly did eliminate managers. And that pushed responsibility to the edge. You want to talk about decision-making and autonomy and responsibility being at the ground level. This proves that this isn't just a tech buzzword or some hippie organization. You can use this in a food packing plant. And what happened were the people in the trenches, the sort of day-to-day ground level workers, became their own bosses. They were responsible for their input and their output. And turns out they were a lot happier being in charge of themselves. And they got a lot more done as a result. And they were much more engaged with their work because suddenly they felt like they had a voice. They felt like they were seen. They felt like they were valued because they were the ones getting credit for their work. Fancy that. Okay. I told you it works sometimes. And I told you it fails miserably other times. And I actually started this thread in the last podcast. So thank you if you're still here listening to this one. What was the word that I made up? Whole something or other. So Zappos, if you know, you know, they made some of the most delicious chips in the world. I found them in Louisiana. They made this like voodoo, super spicy, super delicious, like kettle corn chip. Ugh, they were so good. And I remember being like, what the fuck happened? Well, Zappos rolled out Holacracy. In 2015, Tony C gave an ultimatum to adopt Holacracy or take severance. So this was their CEO trying to roll out emergent business strategy, giving autonomy and empowered decision-making to every single one of their employees. And they said, if you don't adopt this in the next 90 days, you will be fired. 14% left in the first buyout. So the reward was, we're going to roll out this new way of organizing and you'll become owners. This will become more of a co-op situation than it will be a top-down hierarchy. 14% of the employees left before they even got to that point. 30% left within the next 2 years. A new framework without cultural adaptation will fail. So this isn't, again, I talk about how we're like doing it the old way to try and create the new way, which is just repeating the old way in new and different, interesting ways. So what happened is we saw a hierarchical decision, a decision made at the top, rolled out to everybody without buy-in, which means, in my opinion, without understanding. If people don't understand how it's of benefit to them, then they're not going to buy into it. If you haven't invited them into the decision-making process, they're not going to buy into it. If you then tell them that this is happening and you're giving them an ultimatum, they're not going to buy into it. You can disagree with something and still buy in. That's the new way. Old way is do this or else. And we saw what happened, 30% of turnover within a year. That's an incredibly expensive way of doing business, and their chips 100% suffered. Basecamp, which you might be familiar with, their tech company, they had a meltdown. I mean, there's a lot of meltdown out there where the new organizational frameworks were attempted, but they failed. I mean, at the end of the day, they failed. A policy shift intended to create clarity led to a third of the 57-person company opting for buyouts within hours at Basecamp. So small cultural moves can ripple fast in networks. And that's I think actually demonstrative of how close-knit and how powerful these organisms are when we understand their frameworks, because they're all going to be a little different, right? And their values, we can really leverage that and build with it. We can also destroy very quickly. So then the question becomes, why now? And it's not just because everything is crumbling around us. David Epstein, in his book, The Range, asked, why are generalists thriving in a world that rewards specialization? And this is where you're going to start to see the tides of cultural change. So this was 2019, not that long ago. And the reason that I'm pointing out the questions these thought leaders, these builders, these believers are asking is because what's happening is they are responding in real time to what's happening and critiquing it and going, could we do this better? What does this look like if it's different? What assumptions are being made here? How have we always participated in this? And what would a pattern interrupt look like? I think we were all taught, at least people my age were taught, to specialize or die. I feel like that was something I learned in college. And now we're rewarding generalists. We are responding to educational silos and expert failure. We are in a financial crisis. We have survived pandemics and forced closures. We are in a time of wild political uncertainty. And so those that have this broad strokes skill set and therefore thinking are able to sort of look at this complexity from a holistic standpoint. And the ability to kind of look at it from the 30,000 foot view offers this space for innovation. The specialists tend to be siloed and perhaps not able to see the whole picture, which is also where I see this very synergistic relationship. And if you could see me, I'm making sort of that infinity sign with my finger. Generalists and specialists work in tandem with each other. One is not better than the other, but we are currently trending towards generalists. That is emergent strategy. It is looking at what's working and going with it. Daniel Smachtenberger in the Consilience Project, once again mentioned in the last podcast, asked, why are our institutions solving the wrong problems faster? He was alarmed by the ecological overshoot and geopolitical rivalry that we're seeing across nations and across corporations. He believes that designing systems for collective sense-making and long-term coherence is the way forward. So rather than looking at competition, recognizing we're all in this together, no longer is there the same, what's the right word, like differentiation across markets. People don't even want differentiation anymore. We can argue with that, or we can simply observe it and recognize this emergence and what's happened. Building business to serve that new reality is what Schmachtenberger is challenging us to do, rather than continue leaning into this incredibly fragmented global economy that we all thought was going to create an incredibly predictable and fluid economic system. Instead, we've got a very few now controlling the many. And it's just what's happening. So what do we do with that? Rafferty, Catlow, and Bordelot, in their DAO management, creation, and organization, asked, can creatives reclaim agency through decentralized collaboration? So essentially, by spreading the skills, potentially the expertise, the job roles and responsibilities, and the decision making asynchronously, can we overcome these extreme situations and find a balance? So in response to austerity, to censorship, to extractive economies, these DAOs were created as playgrounds, as sandboxes for bottom-up governance, care economies, and tactical autonomy. These were and are and continue to be adaptive experiments that are empowered to regenerate. If something isn't working, we kill it and we try something else. The mycelial web, which I think is the latest concept in this emergence category, asks, can we design spaces? Can we design digital organizations that feel like forests, born out of burnout, disconnection, and tech cynicism? The mycelial web, as opposed to the World Wide Web, offers a regenerative DAO-powered ecosystem modeled into biomimicry, healing, and reciprocity. So the early days of this were open source. But this is where we're literally creating regenerative, communicative, not just automated, but adaptive networks that feed each other. Because the old strategies are still solving for a world that no longer exists. Emergent strategy, these mycelial networks, this agency, this decentralized collaboration, this autonomy, these generalized approaches to ask very specific questions to discover completely new answers. That is where emergent strategy meets the moment. I mean, is it climate collapse or company collapse? These adaptive cycles are required, and they're not going to be found in a quarterly report. The breakdown of existing social networks demand aligned values and relationships over outdated rules and expectations and hierarchy. The tech overload and the burnout and the exhaustion and the doubt and the mental health crises, they're screaming for embodied sovereignty, not algorithmic control. This is an inside job to create outside security and structure. This is complex, and emergence doesn't simplify that. Let's be very clear. However, it does help us dance with the uncertainty and relinquish control for the purpose of creativity. So what the fuck do we do with this, BZ? I know. I don't know. This all kind of makes me go, because there's something vast and open about these questions these people asked. I kind of want to go through them again because I personally found them freeing. What if power doesn't have to mean domination? What if knowledge is relational, not linear? Why do great organizations fail to learn? Why do we fear chaos instead of learning from it? Why treat adults like children? How can we lead without knowing all of the answers? What if organizations could evolve like consciousness? What happens when we ignore the context of our decisions? Why are we still managing people like it's 1911? Why are generalists thriving in a world that rewards specialization? Why are our institutions solving the wrong problems faster? Can artists reclaim agency through decentralized collaboration? Can we design digital spaces that feel like forests? Those questions will literally change your life and therefore everything in and around you. But if you're looking for something a little more tactical, run one safe to fail experiment. Like they do this in tech all of the time. I'm participating in these right now. We call them pilots. We call them sprints. We kind of know this isn't going to work. So let's get through it as fast as we can. Like make some outlandish claim. I'm going to change the radiator in my car. I am not a car mechanic. I did that once. It actually worked. I just did this. I said, I'm going to get in the best shape of my life before the end of the year. I've started doing double yoga classes. That's 2.5 hours of yoga in a 105-degree room. I've gotten through some of them. I have failed miserably in others. And now what I'm trying to workshop is why. Like, why can I get through 2 some days and 2 not the other days? It's an interesting experiment, right? Anywho, define a 2-week test with a measurable learning objective. Here's the thing about that one, though. Make it doable. Like, not doable that you'll succeed, but so I'm going to get in the best shape of my life. That starts now with doing these insane workouts. And then you've got to install a decision-making process that pushes through the resistance. So like I'm doing them back to back. I've tested doing 2 classes in a day. That's much easier. I can successfully get those 2, but it's more challenging in terms of like my own scheduling, right? So I call it the do done decision making process. You can call it whatever you want. I've worked with this. Long time ago, I did an episode on worrying, the worry tree. Like, can I take care of this now? No. Schedule it. Done. Can I take care of this now? Yes. Then fucking solve that problem. Sometimes it's more of like a financial thing. If this costs less than $500, I'm not thinking about it. If this costs less than $5,000, if this costs less than 5, you can pick your threshold, 50, whatever it is. But like we're actioning it, we're getting it done. Getting Things Done by David Allen was a book that really helped me with this whole like decision-making process now, the do done experiment. But when you think about this 2-week safe to fail experiment, whatever the first objection is, create a process around that so that when it pops up again, you can move through it rapidly. And then just let your team, I'm using air quotes, let your team know about this experiment. So that might be your work team. That might be your family team. That might be your internal family systems. But ask them what they might object to in terms of this experiment. And then write down the smallest change that would resolve 80% of that challenge and send it. Make it happen. So do you see what I did there? You're going to pick a 2-week experiment you're going to fail at. Your brain is not going to want to let you fail. So you put in a process to tell your brain to shut the fuck up. Your people, your team, again, other parts of your brain, whatever you want to call it, are also not going to want to fail. So you also tell them what's the biggest challenge here. For your team, it's probably going to be capacity. So you see this in business all of the time. We pick a crazy revenue target. We pick a crazy deadline. We pick a crazily under-resourced group and ask them to do the same amount of work that they did when they were resourced. And go, I know this isn't going to get it over the line. And what happens if we go all in anyway? Oh, Susie's not going to be here on Tuesday. Okay, who can cover for Susie? Great. Got that one out of the way. Oh, I'm personally going to struggle because I know I'm going to have to be the first one in and the last one to leave for 2 weeks. That's going to suck. Okay, can we do it for 2 weeks? Whatever it might be. I just played through those 2 examples. You get to make up the rules, but pick one one safe to fail, not fail safe, one safe to fail experiment and run it for 2 weeks. Okay. So that's kind of like on a personal, potentially personal and professional level. Organizationally, if you have an organizational chart, if you have a hierarchy, if you don't have a chart, I promise you still have a hierarchy. What if you played with what's called a living roles map? So it looks, have you ever seen a mind map where you kind of have a circle with a bunch of branches popping off and then more circles? Most of us wear multiple hats, right? So capture that. Capture the multiple roles rather than writing like BZ, put marketing, accounting, creative, business development. And you kind of branch those off so that you can see how they are connected to each other, but also independent. Then you can kind of create these concentric rings to start to really see how your organism comes together. Where's the mitochondria at? Where are the neurons at? Right? You can create colors. It becomes a sort of beautiful recognition that this might be very amoebic like. This might look more like a virus with like pokey edges and like things sticking out of it. Your organization, your organism gets to look however you want. This might also help you to identify some places where nourishment is needed. You can help your teams to see this as well, to see their own networks. And if the mycelial network is a more desirable metaphor for your people, I'll make a forest. But really start to play with this idea of if the organization is an organism, where are the roots? Where's the stem? Where are the leaves? Where are the petals? Where are we at in our life cycle? You might have multiple life cycles. You might have multiple plants and flowers and flora and fauna. From there, we can build on this model, but I think that's kind of enough right now. If you haven't started yet, if this is all completely new, if you're just listening because you love me and you're one of my friends and this is the only way to catch up with me, I see you. I love you. Thank you. start with a question. How might we ... What if this ... That's actually where a lot of emergent business strategy meetings start. The other thing I think I'm certainly seeing in these emergent business networks is this concept of agreement. How do we work with each other when we know everything is always going to change? Contracts out the door, proposals outdated before they're even sent, agreements, empty promises we know might not last for another week. What we do is we recognize what's the exchange here. There's a desired output. We don't know what it's going to look like. There's a desired input. We don't know how long it's going to take. There's probably a desired exchange, monetary value still being traded back and forth, one for the other, right? Output versus need. And that's kind of the best we can do. So create some regular check-ins, create some ways of exchanging feedback, get clear on how people respond and prefer to exchange feedback, and be willing to experiment. A lightweight networked governance might be useful. So where there are people who are very much involved in the execution and implementation of this experiment, and you're seeing me do another infinity loop here, then there might be people who are really focused on decision making and course correction. So you have some people that are at the 30,000 foot view looking down, not hierarchical, just for this metaphor. And then you've got people on the ground running around getting it done, because that's their preference. That's their expertise. That is their generalized know-how, right? And perhaps those people are wholly focused on the one particular project, where you've got this governance body that are able to focus on multiple projects. So by co-creating that structure together, you create support, you create guidance, you also create execution and implementation, which is really important when we're talking about these new concepts and these new ideas actually playing through the experiment. Really easy to just talk about ideas all the time. Really easy to come up with ideas all the time. Not simple actually doing them. And you're listening to this because you're a doer. So I see you. I am you. Few things to look out for in this experiment, my friend. Do not swap hierarchy for consensus. That's where this decision-making process and this safe to fail experiment actually becomes really useful. It creates accountability. That's where this governance versus implementers is really useful. It creates guidance so that we know we're continuing to actually ideate, implement, iterate, improve, and repeat. So we're actually getting shit done instead of just talking about it. That's where these things can get hung up. We don't need a label yet. We don't need to brand this yet. We don't need the logo. We just kind of need to create and do. And create this feedback mechanism as well. That's kind of, I think, where Zappos fell off with their Holacracy. Holacracy was created by, let's say, the governance structure, and then applied to the implementers and doers who were like, wait, what? When? What? 90 days? Huh? So there does need to be this co-creative process, and then there needs to be space for the safe to fail experiment, which eventually will become the fail safe. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Values without alignment are just bullshit. Walk the walk. Show, not tell. Every single action should be reflective of the values. And this is where that feedback mechanism comes up. What you might see is some inefficiencies. What you might hear are some questions. What you might experience are some mistakes. If those are in alignment with the values that were agreed upon by all participants, it can't go wrong. It just goes awry. One of the things I tell everybody that I work with in this grand experiment is, if you are living by your values, you won't know how you're going to get to your desired destination, but you can't miss it. Because if you're living, my values are fun, freedom, excellence, and adventure. I can't fuck it up. I can't miss the X on the map if every single thing I do checks all 4 of those boxes. I can't. I might not get there fast. I might not get there rich. But I'll fucking get there. So in my notes, the one last thing I am challenging myself to do in this safe to fail experiment, and I started this in the last episode, is admit, like, I really don't know how I'm going to get there right now. I am in the middle of my own experiment, and it is challenging. And I'm going to need to make some more hard decisions in the next couple months because I don't know how this is going to keep working. And hopefully some of the seeds I planted will start harvesting. Hopefully the examples that I am showing, not telling, will start to ripple out. Hopefully my value alignment and my commitment to that will start to reflect back at me. In the interim, I have a variety of empowered choices that I get to make, and I continue to run the experiment. And I know I'm sort of speaking in a very kind of like, what's the word? I can't think anymore. See, this might be the last episode I get to record today, because when I get to this space, we're done. Anywho, I am going to be as honest with you as I possibly can, as per always. You know, it's really important to me that I am in organization. I am leading organization. I am not just talking at you about business, but I am in business running my own experiments. And I want to be as authentic and honest as I can in that process, which is why I'm sharing this right now, because some of my businesses are from a business perspective a little hard to justify in this moment, which then leads me going, do I even get to continue making this podcast? And I don't know the answer to that question right now. That's the experiment I'm running. I've got plenty of time to figure that out. And in the interim, I am going to keep talking about emergent business strategy. I am going to keep walking the walk. I am going to keep standing shoulder to shoulder in solidarity with you. I am going to keep putting out the loop in this podcast. And we'll see where we land together. I would love to hear about the experiments you're running. I would love to know if this is useful for you. There's probably like a solid 12 of us out there. So from me to you, I love you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being willing to build the world I want to live in. And yeah, I'll see you next week.